Welcome, everyone, to today's Peak Policy Update on Artificial Intelligence. I'm Jason Mercier, the Vice President and Research Director for the Mountain States Policy Center. This is a very exciting time in the realm of artificial intelligence and what it means for our schools, for our businesses, and for government efficiency. And Congress is currently debating some important policies around this in the big, beautiful bill that potentially will be on President Trump's desk on July 4th. To help us talk about this very important issue and what it means for all of us in our daily lives, I'm happy to have Neil Chilson join us from the Abundance Institute as one of, if not the top AI expert in the country on policy and how its application can be used across the board. And Neil, in joining us today, if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about what the Abundance Institute is and your role there.
Sure. So it's great to be here. I am the head of AI policy at the Abundance Institute. The Abundance Institute is a mission-driven nonprofit. We're very focused on emerging technologies, and we're focused on creating the right cultural and policy environments that allow those emerging technologies to get a market test and to find the way that they can best solve people's problems and deliver widespread human flourishing. We think technology has been the primary driver of widespread human flourishing over the past 200 years. We want to keep that trend alive. And we're super excited about AI. And we also work on a lot of energy issues, and those issues are increasingly overlapping. So my role as head of AI policy, I focus on a lot of different issues. Obviously, I'm focused a lot on federal policy, but also there's so much activity in the states on this issue. That I've been spending a lot of time working with great partners like you all, but also learning a lot about the states and how we can help shape policy in that area as well and help inform policymakers at the state level. So
that's fantastic. That's why we're excited to have you with us here today. And for those who are viewing on Facebook, LinkedIn, X, or YouTube, we are taking questions. So no matter which platform you're on, go ahead and put your questions in the comments, and we'll get to those throughout the program. But Neil, first of all, when we were children, a child of the 70s, the 80s, artificial intelligence was the stuff of science fiction. And now I'm having conversations with my daughters about your future job opportunities are dependent upon you understanding this technology and being able to apply it. So what do we mean by AI, artificial intelligence?
That's a great question. It's the one I wish more people asked before they started writing laws about it. But the biggest picture answer is that it's actually easier, I think, a little bit to grapple with if you think of AI as the cutting edge of computing technology, or advanced computing. It might be a shorter way to say that. The history of artificial intelligence, which that phrase was coined in the 1950s, is one of seeing a problem and asking, can computers deal with this problem? Because it seems like the kind of problem that takes human intelligence. And then computers actually doing so. And then they kind of stopped calling it artificial intelligence. In fact, the computer scientists who coined the term artificial intelligence said, anytime something works, we stop calling it AI. And so the history of AI is one of, when I was first getting involved in computers, I was really interested in artificial intelligence, but cutting edge AI research at that time was computers playing chess, right? And now anybody's smartphone can play chess better than almost every human out there. And so we don't think of that as cutting edge artificial intelligence anymore. And there's so many technologies in computing that followed that same path. Voice recognition, the ability to identify objects in a picture, the ability to generate speech. These were all things that were considered artificial intelligence technology. Now we don't really think of them that way. In fact, your phone does all of them. Spam filtering, things like that. And so that really is the history of AI. And that means it's really difficult to define AI legislatively because it's a moving target. It's always going to be the sort of cutting edge of what's happening. Now, there is this new wave, this new summer of artificial intelligence that is having a big impact. It is a new type of computing, and this is these machine learning algorithms. We are seeing them, and we're talking about them mostly as chatbots, things that are you type in text and they give you back text. But these same technologies can be used in a wide range of applications, from healthcare to transportation, any space where we have tons of data and it's unstructured and we don't know a lot about the trends and patterns in it, we can feed it into these types of computers and they learn the patterns and they identify from that how we can generate insights and results from it. And so in the language space, that's looked like taking a bunch of language in and learning what the patterns of language are. And so they can respond to questions to us that we ask them in a way that seems like very similar to how humans construct language. But that application is general. AI can be used in a lot of different areas. And so I often encourage policymakers to zoom out from like the chatbot context and think about all the different ways that advanced computing can solve problems for humans.
And it seems like every day we're seeing a new headline concerning artificial intelligence and the application in our economy, right? You have major changes right now at Microsoft and Amazon to where they're letting their future workforce know you need to be versed in this and how it can make your job more efficient and effective for the customer. We've seen President Trump issue executive orders recognizing, as I mentioned, my daughters, having the conversation with them, that you really need to understand this for your future workforce opportunities, where the president's issuing executive orders trying to help states incorporate this into their curriculum. We're seeing colleges now having entire courses on it, and even governments utilizing it for things like permit processing and reviewing applications. So what, on the day-to-day basis, what does the landscape look like for AI technology and its implications for society?
Well, like I said, the target is moving, but the landscape is wide, is open with so many opportunities. I think if we stopped AI development today, which I'm not suggesting, but even if we did, this technology has so many applications that are going to trickle out across the economy. Like I said, artificial intelligence is, well, I should say artificial intelligence is important because intelligence is important and solving problems is important. And we now have these new set of computational tools to help us solve a new set of problems that were harder to do with computers in the past. And so I think you're totally right. I think the president's agenda here to emphasize this as a tool that can be extremely helpful and also one in which we should all be well versed makes a lot of sense. One of the great things about these, at least this chatbot application of these tools, is that they use an interface that we're all very familiar with, language. And so you can learn a lot by using these tools and even asking these tools how you can use them better. And so the on-ramp to using AI is not very steep right now. And I think people should jump in and try it out. It's really the only way we're going to figure out as a society, like where these fit best and how we should try to use them. They are very powerful. And I say, spend 2 hours trying to do things that you would normally do at your job with AI, and you'll figure out quickly like what it's good at and what it's not good at. And so there's nothing that beats hands-on experience with these tools for learning how to use them.
Yeah, I think the perfect example of playing around with it yourself, the Mountain States Policy Center, as we review legislation across the 4 states that we cover, you're talking about 3, 4, 5,000 bills in a given year. That's a lot to go through. So something we actually launched this year is our first AI tool we call Wonk. It's our legislative search engine to where you can type in, if you want to know what's happening in education policy or agriculture policy, it'll show you those bills. It'll review them for you in a matter of seconds and give you the bullet points. So as you indicated, it's not 100% perfect, but when you're trying to go through 5,000 bills, it can save some time and identify issues. As a reminder to our audience joining us on multiple platforms, if you do have questions, go ahead and put them in the comments and we'll get those over to Neil. But Neil, we talked about how AI is being used and its potential, but potential can always be stuck against regulation. So what are we seeing right now across the country is, some states are excited about this opportunity where you've seen them say, we're going to use this for fire prevention. And then you've got states like New York and California that are potentially crippling this new technology. So what's the regulatory landscape looking like across the country?
Oh man, I feel for you and trying to cover a lot of different bills because right now, introduced since January, there are more than 1,000 bills at the state level that deal with artificial intelligence in one way or another. Those clump into a lot of different categories. but some of them are sort of repurposed things that people wanted to do, and now they slap an AI label on the legislation, and they can get at that. But the big picture, the biggest bucket here, I think, are these comprehensive bills at the state level that look a lot like they're sort of modeled on like the comprehensive privacy approaches. But that doesn't translate particularly well to the AI space, where we're talking about a very general purpose technology that often has nothing to do with personal data of any kind. And these types of bills often emphasize the need to correct bias, or to make sure that these algorithms aren't biased against users. And of course, this is a concern that I think we all share. We want accurate results from tools that we use. But a lot of these are written in a way that is aimed at pre-vetting any tool before it gets out on the market. And that pre-vetting will be done by people in Sacramento or Albany, and they'll decide whether or not this algorithm is biased or it's fair. And so it really is embodying a lot of the debates that we've had around DEI and other types of concerns into our computers. And so we have a lot of concerns about how that would play out over time, both on obviously the substantive side of who is shaping what these algorithms do and what decisions they give out, but also just compliance cost wise. If you have 50 states, many of them with multiple layers of regulation that you have to go through before you can release a product, we just think that will slow down a lot of the innovation in this space. That's not to say that we often hear that sort of AI is unregulated, but that's sort of like saying computers are unregulated. It's sort of true, but in application, it's not really true, because if you use computers, to make insurance decisions or housing decisions, or you use computers to drive cars, or you use computers to make phone calls, these are all areas that have lots of regulation in them. And the use of a new technology doesn't make that regulation disappear. And so there are lots of ways that AI is regulated today in its use, even when it's not regulated maybe in the abstract as AI. And so that's the policy landscape. We have a rush of policy proposals in this space, both at the federal and the state level. But a lot of them seem duplicative and perhaps opportunistic to achieve other types of agendas that people wanted to achieve.
But Neil, before we get to what's happening in Congress right now, with your background in tech policy and seeing what's happening on the ground, let me give you a softball question. In your opinion, are policymakers very good predictors of technology and how it's going to change and innovate to the ability to regulate that?
No, but I'd say this is a space where nobody's particularly good at that. And honestly, technologists have never been particularly good at that. They know about the frameworks right now, but often they don't know a ton about how a general purpose, especially a general purpose technology that has millions and millions of applications, they don't know a lot about how that's going to change the economy or jobs or where the effects are going to play out. That's the kind of thing that needs to happen from people taking that tool, trying to solve their own problems with it. And that's an emergent process that, frankly, nobody's particularly good at predicting. And so what that suggests is that both technologists and policymakers need to take views of new technology that are focused on what are the potential, like focus very much on the types of harms you're trying to prevent, because those things don't change that fast, right? So losing money, not being safe, being physically harmed, all of these types of harms are things that we've known about forever. We have lots of legal frameworks around them. So if you focus on that and try to keep your policies tech neutral, you often cover a lot of the issues that might come up in a new technology, even though you don't have to be an expert in that technology. And so I think that's the preferable approach in this space, is to keep it at the general purpose, use focused laws, rather than trying to deeply understand and micromanage technology. That's sort of, even if you get there for right now, like next week, your knowledge is probably going to be obsolete.
So, Neil, before we get to the Congress, we have got a couple of questions that have come in. And again, continue to put questions in the comments. The first one, are you scared or excited about AI in the future?
I'm pretty excited. I'm an optimist. I recognize that that change can be really, and fast change especially, can be very nerve wracking. But the trend shows over time that technology has been a boon, even when it has been disruptive at times. And so we've seen that over and over. And so I'm pretty excited. One of the things that makes me most excited in this space about AI in particular is its applications in the healthcare space. We're already seeing not just, you've probably, your audience has probably come across people on Reddit or on Twitter talking about how they asked ChatGPT about, some medical condition they were experiencing, and it helped them like reach a decision much earlier and go to the right doctors much earlier and get a condition that nobody had really pinpointed, identified. That's one way, but even outside of that, we have seen already the rise of AI powered ability to deliver treatments to people that are sort of what they call N of one. There's just really this problem is a problem really just for one or a very small group of people. And AI now makes it possible to create treatments for those types of conditions that affect millions of people in aggregate, but there's only like 5 or 10 people who have this specific problem. And so that type of like customized medicine that can help people like as individuals, I think is really powerful. I think we're going to see a lot more treatments that can identify the specific issues that are going on with you or with your family member and help treat them as an individual rather than as an average of everybody across the whole population. And I think that's really powerful. I think it's going to help us live longer, healthier lives. And so I'm pretty excited on that front.
Well, we'll get into the big, beautiful bill in just a second, but another question came in related to that about the ability to influence millions of people and provide them information. So, along those lines, is there a role for government to make sure that the AI algorithms or developers can't put their thumb on the scale to impact that information that is being sent to the masses?
Well, I actually have a whole series on this in my my Substack, which you can see at outofcontrol.substack.com. And the issue here is complicated because there's different types of thumbs on the scale that you might have, right? And so some of the types of thumbs on the scale that people on the left, political left, are worried about are these ideas of like implicit or systemic bias. And they really are worried about this as a problem because the data sets that come in influence the decisions that go out. And so that's what a lot of these comprehensive state bills are addressing, is trying to like figure out like, how do we make sure that this is not biased? And again, the left often thinks of this as the right way to do this is to put like a government official in charge of vetting a piece of software to figure out whether or not it's biased. And I'm quite concerned about that particular solution. However, there is another type of like imposed bias or where somebody is trying particularly to shape the outcomes of an AI, that intentional bias. I think that's what the question is about. And we've actually seen examples of that. The thing that's really interesting in this space is both that type of intentional bias is, well, first of all, two things. One, often they apply that because they're getting pressure to get rid of implicit bias. And so you get this pressure in one direction. And we saw that with Google's Gemini image generation, where because of a sort of general instruction that they had to the AI, the image generation, that it had to be ethnically diverse in its results. When people asked, for example, for pictures of the founding fathers, they got historically inaccurate representation of the founding fathers. And so that type of the thing that's really interesting in this space, a couple things that make me think that there's less of a government role here, not a zero government role, but less of a government role for that type of bias, is that the feedback loops here are really, really, really strong. And so when Gemini started delivering those types of images, it was, 10 seconds until somebody posted that on Twitter, and the feedback loop there from the market was very strong. Like this is not what we want. And so that, I think that's true generally around AI and generative AI tools. You can quickly see what the result is. And if you don't like the result, often you can push the model into a different direction and say like, hey, actually, like, I understand your underlying like result is that I want something else. And you can push it and think of it as a conversation. So there's some mitigation tools just for users, but bigger picture, I think there's also that feedback loop is pretty strong. And also there's just like such a wide range of these tools right now. So we know a lot of the big names of the AI model services that are out there, but there are literally millions of models that have been trained with all sorts of different intentions and approaches. And even among the big ones, we have a wide diversity in sort of how they interpret questions and what their responses are. And so, Grok feels really different and will give you a different set of responses than, Anthropic's Claude or OpenAI's ChatGPT. And so there is a lot of choices in this market right now. I think we will want that competition. We want those choices. I think if somebody wants to train a, libertarian, New Hampshire vibed ChatGPT, like that's fine. If somebody wants to train like a Vermont Bernie Sanders vibed, generative model, that's fine too, as long as users know what they're getting and it can figure out very quickly what their expectations are. I think the market can actually supply a lot of this feedback loop. And so there might be a role for government transparency in some of this, but I don't think there is a heavy-handed role for government to sort of shape the content policies of these companies, because I think that runs into all sorts of concerns with the First Amendment and just like downside effects for anytime government gets involved in making choices about content.
Excellent. So now let's get to the big, beautiful bill. Our colleague, Sebastian Griffin, who is our technology director here at Mountain States Policy Center, recently teamed up with your colleague at the Abundance Institute to talk about why Congress should be considering this 10-year moratorium on state regulation of AI. And, as an organization who supports federalism and is a strong defender of the 10th Amendment and the free market, why would we be talking about a federal moratorium over what states can do? What's being discussed in Congress, and why is that important?
Right. So this provision that was added initially to the House version of the big, beautiful bill and has been changed quite a lot in the Senate version. The current version, what it does is it conditions about $500 million of federal spending on states taking a pause on the enforcement of AI specific laws in their jurisdiction. And so this type of funding condition is like the sort of thing like where highway funds were conditioned on having speed limits of 55 or drinking ages of 21, right? It's a sort of, it uses Congress's spending power to say like, hey, like you don't have to take the money, but if you do take the money, here are some conditions on that money. And this money is intended for AI infrastructure. And so it's tied to this issue where the government doesn't want to be spending money to help AI infrastructure be built out if the state in which that money is being spent is sort of through regulation hampering the ability to deploy AI. And so I think it raises less federalism concerns, less 10th Amendment concerns than if there was like a blanket ban on states doing this. And so, states have the option to not take this. And so I should say there's a lot of exceptions to the moratorium itself that include things like if you're writing a general purpose bill that says, like, for example, child pornography, which is illegal at the federal level, which this bill doesn't touch. But if you're writing a state specific, child pornography or a deep fake child pornography bill, you can write it in a way that doesn't talk about AI at all, And that won't be addressed. That won't be blocked by this moratorium. And so if you're focused on either promoting AI, that's another one of the exemptions, or if you are writing a general purpose bill that is tech neutral, that addresses some specific problem, but it also, limits how AI can be deployed because AI might be used to cause that same problem. This moratorium doesn't block those types of bills. So there's a lot of room still for states to act in this space. What it's really targeted at, like I said, are these big comprehensive bills that are coming out of New York, Connecticut, Colorado has one, California, that are sweeping bills that try to impose like design principles on all of AI. And so the real concern here that I have is, that folks in your states, no matter what your states do, because of the size of the markets in California and New York, the rules that they set for AI will be the rules that govern the country. And we've seen that California has done that over and over and over, including on, efficiency standards, for vehicles, lots of other things where they set the rules. And because they're such a big market, everybody complies to that. And so I worry that Sacramento and Albany will be setting the rules for people in Bozeman and rather than the people in Bozeman, setting those rules themselves. And so I think what this does is give some space for Congress to say like, hey, we need an overarching framework here that's uniform across the 50 states. And there will be a division. I have no doubt there will be a division because this is a general purpose technology. It has uses that are clearly, like I said, clearly within the state's prerogatives. Policing, insurance is an area where states, housing, these are all requirements, transportation requirements. These are all areas where the states have a lot of a role. And I think ultimately we will have a framework that recognizes that special role in the states, but also has an overarching pro-innovation role at the federal level for the types of AI uses that don't stop at state borders, but flow across them. And I think that's totally consistent with federalism. And that's why I think we're supportive of this approach to pause this flood of legislation, let Congress figure out how to do this while allowing states to continue to solve, specific problems that they have through general purpose regulation. Just stopping the Sacramentos and Albanys from regulating the rest of us.
Let me drill down to that just a little bit, because that California electric vehicle and the California emission standards is a perfect example. Usually you want states to be the laboratories of democracy and to innovate and try new things, but you can't be impacting interstate commerce and the commerce of other states. So if there was not this moratorium and the California and New York laws were to take effect, what would that mean for businesses in Idaho and Montana and Wyoming? How does that impact their economic outlook?
Well, not in a great way. And another example here, and maybe that's one that's closer to the AI space, is, when you go to a website and you get that cookie box and you have to click yes. That's a California law, right? Like that started with California. Some other states have that as well, but California is the primary driver of that. It doesn't matter where you are in the country. You're still clicking that box because people can't tell. The companies just find it easier to do that and comply with that rather than try to figure out who is or isn't in California. And so the effect that would have on the states, I think, is huge. James Madison Institute just came out with a report this morning, actually, that focuses on the effect that it would have on Florida of these sort of general purpose, high overarching AI regulations. And so if people in Wyoming who want to build a new company have to figure out how to comply with California law, like that's going to take lawyer time. It also may just redirect people to do something else that isn't in this space and not solve the problems that maybe are unique to Wyoming. And they may just try to solve other types of problems rather than trying to build AI tools. And I think that's a negative impact on innovation. It also will stop the delivery of some of these tools to the users in states that aren't California or New York. And so I think that just general slowdown on innovation here by states who are not don't share the values necessarily, the people being affected, I think that's a real problem. And I think it's something that this moratorium helps slow down until we can figure out a national framework that makes a ton of sense.
We've got several more questions coming in, and a reminder to put your questions in the comments. But before I get to that, Neil, what's the latest with the Senate parliamentarian on what can be part of the big, beautiful bill and not on this? And what does your crystal ball look like? What will we see come July 4th, and this is on the president's desk concerning this issue?
Man, well, for this specific issue, we have heard that the parliamentarian has okayed this provision. There was a lot of back and forth. It was sort of, it was on and it was off again, then it was on again. So I think the final version is okayed. So it will be as part of the package that goes to the floor in the Senate. Now, I should say, I don't think this is even in the top 10 of most controversial things in the big, beautiful bill as far as Congress is concerned. And so there are a lot of other things that people are fighting about in this bill. And so when it all goes to the floor and there's this big vote-a-rama, people will offer amendments. They will offer, tweaks to the language. And so I don't know exactly what's going to happen here with this particular provision. A lot of the concerns around this provision were driven by narratives that were based on the earlier versions of the text. And so that as the text has evolved, I'm hopeful that those narratives, as those problems, those concerns have been addressed, that people will be supportive of this. Right now, it seems like there is strong support in the Republican caucus, but with the narrow margins in the Senate, it would only take a few people on either side to flip to make to mean that this would go out. So I'm hopeful that this will be in. I think it's a good policy for the United States. I think it's actually good for a lot of the states who are more freedom oriented in this space. But my crystal ball is not good enough to know really exactly what Congress is going to do on this front. Sorry.
So Neil, you reminded me of another question before I get to our viewers' question. You mentioned this is in the interest of the United States. What's happening right now with China and the EU having a national framework versus what could happen if you had a 50-state patchwork?
Yeah, it's a great question. So China and Europe both have frameworks around AI. And I should say the European one was early. It was adopted almost entirely and drafted almost entirely before ChatGPT was even released. And so when ChatGPT was released, they had to go through and retrofit a bunch of things because they were like, oh, we hadn't really thought about this particular technology, which is just a great example of your point earlier that regulators are not necessarily great at predicting where the technology is going to go. Now, the Europeans, the EU Act, as one might guess, is very prescriptive and precautionary. And so I don't look to Europe and think, oh, no, we're in a race with Europe on this stuff. In fact, Europeans are working pretty hard right now internally to try to figure out how to dial back some of these restrictions that they've put on themselves because they've seen that they have no major tech companies. They have none of the major unicorns, despite having a well-educated, prosperous economy, not nearly as prosperous as the U.S., but they've seen that as a real problem. I think JD Vance, when he went over there for an AI summit, pointed out to them that they're sort of tying their own hands and competing in this space. Now, China, on the other hand, is very aggressively pursuing artificial intelligence technology, and due to the non-democratic structure of their government, they are not dealing with 1,000 state laws in this front. They are ramming ahead as fast as they can on this front. And so one of the things that I say is it doesn't matter what laws we pass here. The Chinese developers aren't going to be constrained by them. And so people who talk about competition as an international dynamic and the need for the U.S., which does have the leading technology in this space and the leading talent, if we want to keep that edge, one of the things we need to do is make sure that our regulatory frameworks permit our entrepreneurs and our innovators to continue to build and permit our businesses to continue to apply that new technology to the problems that they face so that we can get the benefits and keep the American economy growing.
Excellent. So I mentioned earlier how we're seeing, cities like Seattle using AI for permit verification. You've got states even like California using it for wildfire detection. The
Mhm.
question that we have from one of our viewers is, should voters decide if their state, local, or the federal government is using AI, and where and when?
So I think that the answer is yes, of course. I mean, I think that part of the job of government is to be responsive to the concerns and the needs of voters. I think that, again, the trick with AI is, if you think about it as advanced computing, ask that question to yourself again. Should voters decide whether or not we use advanced computing if their government uses that? And it's like, yes, that's true. But it's kind of too abstract of a question to answer concretely. And so we might ask things that are more like, should the voters decide if their government should use it in policing, or should they use it in judgments in courts or sentencing or something like that? And there you might have a more concrete question. And once you have that question, you can ask yourself, well, have the voters already decided some of this? And there are, like I said, there are a bunch of laws that govern uses and outcomes of how government, for example, can use technology. Not let alone the Fourth Amendment, but there's lots of state constitutional restrictions as well, lots of state statutes that govern how police use surveillance technology, for example, or do surveillance generally. And so, in many ways, we may have already decided some of those questions, even if we have forgotten that we helped make those decisions at some point in the past. And so, I obviously encourage voters to become very aware of what their governments are doing and how they're using this technology. I think there are huge benefits to government efficiency in this space, but there are obviously risks in this space as well. And it's up to us to keep ourselves informed about what those risks might be, and help shape that policy as our local, state, and federal officials decide it.
Well, Neil, I haven't received an email from a Nigerian prince asking for money in a long time, but I do get numerous very tailored and specific emails pitching me business services and other things. So, one of the questions we have from our viewers is, are we seeing an increase in what they would call spam, text, email, social media related to AI?
So this is I think a live concern, right? So anytime, these tools are very good at generating realistic text, right? And that sounds custom built to you, or that is custom built to you. And so there is a potential here for more targeted types of advertisements through email or through text. We obviously have lots of laws around when you can text somebody with commercial intent, or what are the rules around when somebody subscribes or unsubscribes, can spam, and some of these other laws. Now, because the internet is international, that it's hard to police those laws. And so that is part of the challenge. But one of the things that AI does let us do is AI is getting much better at also recognizing spam. And so, I mean, I think you all probably use in your Gmail or whatever email service you have, almost certainly have spam filters that are continuously getting better, not just at blocking out like completely unsolicited spam, but also classifying your email into like more useful buckets so that you're not drowning in, trying to find that email from your boss or from your spouse. And I think that technology continues to get better. And so there is a little bit of an arms race here. And so I would expect that we will continue to see that our tools of, the spam protections, the ability to filter content down to the types of things that you want to see and not the things that you want to see, will continue to improve, as the ability to generate lots more text has obviously improved as well.
That's fantastic. Well, before we head over to some of our future events here at the Mountain States Policy Center, Neil, I wanted to give you an opportunity for any closing thoughts that you may have on what's happening with the Big Beautiful Bill, or just future AI trends that we should all be aware of, and potential policies that we may be seeing at the state level.
Well, Again, we'll see what happens with the big beautiful bill and this moratorium. I do think that it's important, no matter what happens, for there to be a role both for the federal government and for the states in this, and that role should very much be focused on how do we get the maximum benefit out of this really, really powerful technology. As I mentioned at the start, this is not just a policy question. This is also a cultural question. The US has historically been very good at embracing new technologies. But if you look at the polling, and I think it's in part because of sort of the connotations as large media, like entertainment consumers that we are, the connotations that artificial intelligence has had, for example, in the movie industry, the US is actually pretty skeptical of this technology. And so when it's called AI, I think they feel less skeptical about it if you talk about like improving healthcare or some of the applications. But in the abstract, we tend to think about Terminator. And so my encouragement to everybody is get engaged in the policy questions, but also get engaged in trying to use these technologies, figuring out how they can be useful to you. I think that will dispel a lot of the myths and fears around what it could be. And also, it will help better prepare you for the future and understand what might be coming. So that's hard to predict. It's even harder to predict if you're not using the tools, and they're open and available today. I encourage people to try them out.
That's fantastic. Neil, I really appreciate you taking the time and for your expertise and the partnership that we have with the Abundance Institute to advance technology and energy policy. And for those that have joined us on Peak Policy, we do many of these events throughout the year, focus on issues, and we also hold in-person events. And we're really hopeful that you can join us for one of our annual dinners here coming up. We've got one in Boise on October 9th with Jonathan Turley and a to-be-announced special guest. And then for those in Montana, we hope you can join us November 6th for our Liberty Dinner with Ben Carson, who's previously spoke for us in Idaho. It's a great event. Well, again, Neil and the Abundance Institute, thank you for your leadership and expertise on this. Thank you all for joining us. And we look forward to talking with you again soon on another Peak Policy.
Thanks a lot for having me. It was a great time.
Thanks for watching Mountain States Policy Center. To stay up to date on the work of MSPC, visit mountainstatespolicy.org or find us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Mountain States Policy Center. Free markets first.
It's the ideas that matter. The Mountain States Policy Manual is a 200-page guide filled with facts, figures, and recommendations on everything from agriculture to education, healthcare, and even transportation. Ideas backed up by years of research, including how to expand on education reform, improving the transparency and accountability of government, lowering healthcare costs and improving patient care, limiting regulations so our small businesses can thrive, and limiting the tax burden we're placing on our families. No other tool will help a lawmaker lead, a journalist write, or an everyday citizen hold their government accountable more than the Mountain States Policy Manual. Because in the end, it's not about the personalities or even the politics, it's about the policies. Visit mountainstatespolicy.org or find the policy manual on Amazon.